Dew gathers on cool morning grass beside the pine trail. The still lake reflects a pale sky, smooth and unbroken. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves, barely moving. Fog settles into low valleys, holding everything in quiet. Moss grows on ancient stones along the shaded path. A slow river bends through a quiet meadow, steady and clear. Birch bark peels in a gentle wind, making no sound. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air above the reeds. Moonlight pools on the forest floor between tall, whispering pines. The still lake reflects pale sky colors, like brushed silver. Dew forms again on cool morning grass near small ferns. Soft rain taps broad green leaves with a patient rhythm. Fog settles into low valleys, smoothing edges of distant hills. Moss grows on ancient stones beside the riverbank. The slow river bends through a quiet meadow, easing past grasses. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air over darkening water. Birch bark peels in gentle wind along the lakeshore path. Moonlight pools on the forest floor under layered branches. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields beyond the tree line. The still lake reflects pale sky, calm as polished glass. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves near cedar and pine. Dew forms on cool morning grass where footprints never linger. Fog settles into low valleys beneath rolling hills at dusk. Moss grows on ancient stones, damp and comfortably cool. The slow river bends through a quiet meadow, carrying soft reflections. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air among tall meadow flowers. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, curling like thin paper ribbons. Moonlight pools on the forest floor, lighting needles and cones. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields, muffling every distant sound. The still lake reflects pale sky, tones behind thin clouds. Soft rain touches broad green leaves around a sheltered clearing. Dew forms on cool morning grass at the edge of water. Fog settles into low valleys, resting there without movement. Moss grows on ancient stones where small streams once wandered. The slow river bends through a quiet meadow, almost silent now. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air near clusters of cattails. Moonlight pools on the forest floor in wide, gentle patches. Birch bark peels in gentle wind beside a leaning fence rail. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields under a gray-blue night. The still lake reflects pale sky light with steady calm. Soft rain lingers on broad green leaves and dark pine needles. Dew forms on cool morning grass even as evening deepens nearby. Fog settles into low valleys until distant shapes feel softened. Moss grows on ancient stones with a velvety, settled texture. The slow river bends through a quiet meadow under muted moonlight. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air, then hover close to grasses. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, while everything else stays still. Moonlight pools on the forest floor, and silence rests deeper now. A still lake reflects a pale sky with smooth, unbroken clarity. Soft rain touches broad green leaves, then slides in patient lines. Moss grows on ancient stones beside the shore, cool and steady. Fog settles into low valleys, resting gently among distant pines. The slow river bends through a quiet meadow, carrying muted reflections downstream. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air, moving like small lanterns. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, curling softly along white trunks. Moonlight pools on the forest floor, silvering needles and small cones. Dew forms on cool morning grass where the meadow meets darker woods. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields far beyond the river bend. The still lake reflects the pale sky again, now slightly dimmer. Soft rain returns to broad green leaves, barely stirring their edges. Moss grows on ancient stones near a narrow path lined with ferns. Fog settles into low valleys, smoothing the shapes of hillsides. Moonlight pools on the forest floor beneath tall pines and spruce. The slow river bends through a quiet meadow with steady ease. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air above reeds and low flowers. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, making tiny curls along branches. Dew forms on cool morning grass where shadows gather early. The still lake reflects a pale sky that seems calm and distant. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves and gathers at their tips. Moss grows on ancient stones beside a small footbridge of weathered wood. Fog settles into low valleys until every edge looks softened. Moonlight pools on the forest floor, quieting every path between trunks. The slow river bends through a quiet meadow, tracing a long curve. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields beyond the darker tree line. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air, close to clover and thyme. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, while branches remain relaxed. Dew forms on cool morning grass along the riverbank's gentle slope. The still lake reflects a pale sky as clouds pass slowly overhead. Soft rain touches broad green leaves with a light, even rhythm. Moss grows on ancient stones where water beads and lingers. Fog settles into low valleys while distant birds settle into silence. Moonlight pools on the forest floor in rounded patches of light. The slow river bends through a quiet meadow without any hurry. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air and then float lower. Birch bark peels in gentle wind along a ridge above the lake. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields where fences stand quietly apart. Dew forms on cool morning grass that cools the air nearby. The still lake reflects a pale sky with softened color. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves until each leaf feels heavier. Moss grows on ancient stones with tiny threads catching faint light. Fog settles into low valleys as if placed there carefully. Moonlight pools on the forest floor, turning roots into gentle lines. The slow river bends through a quiet meadow under dimmer evening tones. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air, then pause near cattails. Birch bark peels in gentle wind and settles against damp earth. The still lake reflects a pale sky as everything becomes quieter now. Rain keeps tapping broad leaves, and each sound lands softly nearby. The canopy holds the droplets, letting them slide in unhurried paths. A few beads gather at the tips, then fall onto fern fronds. The forest air stays cool, and the ground smells clean. Fireflies drift through warm dusk air over the meadow's edge. Their small lights move slowly, like lanterns carried by careful hands. They hover above grasses, then wander toward darker hedgerows. Crickets keep a steady rhythm that blends with distant water. Fog settles into low valleys between the rolling hills and pines. It lies close to the earth, smoothing every contour into softness. Far trees look gentler, their outlines rounded by misty layers. Footpaths seem quieter under this calm blanket of gray. Moonlight pools on the forest floor beneath tall trunks and branches. It gathers in pale patches beside roots and fallen needles. Shadows rest without sharp edges, and everything looks evenly spaced. Even the smallest stones appear calm where light touches them. Birch bark peels in gentle wind along a narrow trail. Thin curls lift and loosen, then settle against the trunk again. The white surface catches dim light, showing soft lines and markings. Nearby pines stand steady, their scent quiet and familiar. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields beyond the tree line. Each flake drifts downward with no hurry at all tonight. The open ground looks smooth, as if covered by clean cloth. Fence posts were small caps of white in silence. Dew forms on cool morning grass along a shaded clearing. Tiny drops cling to blades, making them bend slightly lower. The meadow holds a faint sheen where early light would linger. Breath moves gently, matching the slow pace of everything around. A still lake reflects a pale sky behind dark spruce silhouettes. The surface stays smooth, holding mirrored clouds without any ripples. Near shore, reeds stand upright, their tips barely moving. Stones at the waterline rest half-submerged and slick. Moss grows on ancient stones beside a narrow woodland streamlet. Soft green cushions spread across rough surfaces in patient patterns. Small grains of sand nestle in seams between rock faces. Everything feels velvety where moisture lingers longest. A slow river bends through a quiet meadow under lowering twilight tones. Water curves around grasses and makes a low sound like brushing silk. Along the bank, willows lean slightly toward the current's steady pull. The far side of the meadow rests in deeper shade. Rain returns as a fine veil over broad leaves near the path. Droplets meet earlier dampness and blend into one continuous hush. From branch to branch, water travels with measured patience downward. The forest listens quietly, holding each sound close. Moonlight pools again on pine needles and soft moss near stones. Fireflies drift farther off until only a few remain nearby. Fog settles lower in the valleys, turning hills into gentle shapes alone. The river continues its bend through meadow grass with softened sound now. Fog settles into low valleys where spruce shadows rest without movement. A still lake reflects pale sky in a smooth, unbroken sheet. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, curling like paper along trunks. Soft rain on broad green leaves keeps time with quiet, even taps. Moss grows on ancient stones beside the path, thick and cool. Moonlight pools on forest floor, touching roots and fallen needles. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, carrying reeds in patient flow. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air above grasses, then hover lower. Dew forms on cool morning grass along the meadow's edge. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields beyond the distant line of trees. The still lake reflects pale sky again, now lightly brushed with mist. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, and the sound stays small. Soft rain on broad green, leaves returns near low branches over the trail. Fog settles into low valleys, smoothing every slope into calm layers. Moss grows on ancient stones, holding tiny beads of water steadily. Moonlight pools on forest floor between ferns, leaving silver patches. A slow river bends through quiet meadow and slides past tufts of sedge. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air near the riverbank, then wander apart. Dew forms on cool morning grass where the meadow meets pine shade. The still lake reflects pale sky, and ripples never arrive. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields far beyond the hills' rounded backs. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, revealing lighter layers beneath. Soft rain on broad green leaves gathers at tips, then drops quietly down. Fog settles into low valleys and rests there as if at home. Moonlight pools on forest floor near a fallen log softened by moss. Moss grows on ancient stones close to the waterline of shore. A slow river bends through quiet meadow and keeps its steady curve. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air above clover and low flowers. Dew forms on cool morning grass along a narrow track between pines. The still lake reflects pale sky with a faint sheen of cloud. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, while branches remain mostly still. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields that lie beyond the meadow. Soft rain on broad green leaves slips toward the ground in careful threads. Fog settles into low valleys until distant trees appear like soft outlines. Moonlight pools on forest floor and lingers among cones and needles. Moss grows on ancient stones and cushions each edge and corner. A slow river bends through quiet meadow under leaning grasses beside banks. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air nearer to water, then dimly scatter. Dew forms on cool morning grass where hoofprints hold small shining beads. The still lake reflects pale sky without any call from birds. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields as night keeps everything unhurried nearby. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, then rests flat against trunk again. Soft rain on broad green leaves becomes lighter, almost only a touch now. Fog settles into low valleys and holds each hollow gently. Moonlight pools on forest floor as if poured into shallow bowls of needles. Moss grows on ancient stones beside the path where footsteps never hurry. A slow river bends through quiet meadow with barely audible movement at turns. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air until only one glows close by quietly. The still lake reflects a pale sky, smooth as brushed glass tonight. Dew forms on cool morning grass, though the hour remains calm. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, making a dry and tender sound. Soft rain on broad green leaves settles into a quieter, steadier rhythm. Moss grows on ancient stones where the path curves beside ferns. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, carrying small ripples downstream. Fog settles into low valleys, resting like a thin blanket of gray. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air, their lights spaced far apart. Moonlight pools on forest floor between roots and fallen needles. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields beyond the dark line of trees. The still lake reflects a pale sky, holding each star without wavering. Dew forms on cool morning grass near the shore, cool and clean. Soft rain on broad green leaves gathers at tips, then drops quietly. Birch bark peels in gentle wind along a grove by the water. Moss grows on ancient stones that sit half-sunk in earth. Fog settles into low valleys, smoothing edges of meadow and hill. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, its surface dim and steady. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air above reeds near the bank. Moonlight pools on forest floor where small mushrooms rise near logs. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields, turning fences into pale lines. The still lake reflects a pale sky as clouds pass without hurry. Dew forms on cool morning grass along a narrow trail of clover. Soft rain on broad green leaves becomes finer, like misty threads. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, then lies close again. Moss grows on ancient stones beside a low wall of stacked rocks. Fog settles into low valleys, quieting distant shapes among the hills. A slow river bends through quiet meadow with soft turns around grasses. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air, fewer now and gentler. Moonlight pools on forest floor under pines that stand close together. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields beyond the ridge, almost silent. The still lake reflects a pale sky near midnight, calm and unbroken. Dew forms on cool morning grass at the edge of shade. Soft rain on broad green, leaves taps lightly, then pauses between drops. Birch bark peels in gentle wind along trunks that lean slightly inward. Moss grows on ancient stones that keep their coolness through seasons. Fog settles into low valleys until even paths seem softened. A slow river bends through quiet meadow and carries reeds in slow motion. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air over the last open patch of wildflowers. Moonlight pools on forest floor and rests upon pine cones and needles. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields as if laid down gently. The still lake reflects a pale sky, while distant owls remain quiet nearby. Dew forms on cool morning grass where small flowers close their petals. Soft rain on broad green, leaves becomes barely more than a hush now. Birch bark peels in gentle wind as the grove stays settled. Moss grows on ancient stones beside water that moves with patient ease. Fog settles into low valleys and holds every hollow with steady calmness. A slow river bends through quiet meadow and keeps its course untroubled. Moonlight pools on forest floor until everything feels softer and quieter here now. Dew forms again on cool morning grass along the shaded path. The still lake reflects pale sky, holding clouds in a smooth mirror. Moss grows on ancient stones where tiny ferns rest near water. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, tracing a gentle curve. Soft rain rests on broad green leaves, each drop sliding without hurry. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air above the meadow grasses. Fog settles into low valleys, smoothing edges of distant trees. Moonlight pools on forest floor, silvering roots and fallen needles. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, making a small, dry whisper. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields beyond the last line of pines. Dew forms on cool morning grass near a log dark with moisture. The still lake reflects pale sky as ripples settle into silence. Moss grows on ancient stones beside a narrow trail of clear water. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, carrying reeds in steady rhythm. Soft rain on broad green leaves gathers at tips, then drops lightly. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air, moving like patient sparks. Fog settles into low valleys, resting over streams and low shrubs. Moonlight pools on forest floor between trunks spaced wide and calm. Birch bark peels in gentle wind, curling like paper along the trunk. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields, covering stubble with clean hush. Dew forms on cool morning grass around stones set beside the trail. The still lake reflects pale sky while the shoreline grasses stand still. Moss grows on ancient stones, deep green against gray and brown. A slow river bends through quiet meadow where cattails lean gently. Soft rain on broad green leaves keeps time with a quiet, even patter. Fireflies drift in warm dusk air just above the riverbank flowers. Fog settles into low valleys and softens every distant ridgeline. Moonlight pools on forest floor, resting beside mushrooms and pine cones. Birch bark peels in gentle wind as branches hold steady overhead. Snow falls softly on sleeping fields far away from the waterline now. Dew forms on cool morning grass where footprints never press or linger. The still lake reflects pale sky until shore and water match perfectly. Moss grows on ancient stones, and each stone feels cool to touch. A slow river bends through quiet meadow, then continues beyond low hills. Soft rain on broad green leaves becomes lighter, almost only a misty touch. Moonlight pools on forest floor while fog settles into low valleys nearby.